John McMullen is with us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, 97.3 ESPN's own Johnny Mac covers the Philadelphia Eagles. He also covers the league nationally. You can read his national columns at getmoresports.com. As the NFL, the Eagles are just about a month or so away, actually less than a month away now, Pete Thompson, from training camp. July 25th, we've been counting down the teams chasing the Eagles. We'll pick back up on that on Monday's show. We'll have other NFL conversation, of course, all throughout the week, leading you up to July 25th when the Eagles are back on the field. But let's look at some of the things that are happening today as the Sports Bash continues to look at the NFL offseason here on 97.3 ESPN. John, what's happening, man?
Doing well. How are you guys?
We're doing well, and, it seems like, we were kind of talking about this Jameis Winston thing, the last couple of days, and one relating to if he got suspended, what that would mean for the Eagles playing them in week number 2. 2, if they got suspended and want to decide to move on from him at some point, that the Eagles could be in play, Nick Foles. 3, does the NFL need to kind of get its act together in making these type of suspension issues? And it seems that now a lot of people are kind of bringing that up, that the NFL needs to better explain their policies. A lot of people seem to be kind of up in arms that this Winston thing was only a 3-game suspension, but is there the possibility that the NFL will cave in and change this thing?
Well, I don't think so, for the main reason that the one time the NFL did lose, and it wasn't in court, but it was with an arbiter, Barbara Jones, is when they tried to do the double jeopardy thing, and that was Ray Rice, if you remember. They suspended him 2 games. There was the uproar, the outrage, and they tried to double back and change that, and that's not going to work. Even when you have a collective bargaining agreement that's ironclad and gives the commissioner the power to give any suspension he wants, you can't go doubly. you can't use a mulligan. So I would say that's the only thing that's not going to happen. But part of this is people have to get educated on this policy.
Yeah, that's what I think a key point in that I think a lot of people need to be a little bit better. It needs to be clear for some people.
Well, yeah, but I don't know if that's necessarily the NFL's fault. Granted, people don't want to get, and I'm not blaming fans here because they don't want to get involved with the minutia of this. But I will take aim at reporters who don't know the difference between a substance abuse suspension and a personal conduct suspension in this league. If they don't know it, they need to read the policies, because the substance abuse and PEDs are structured. The personal conduct is not, and that is up to the commissioner, and nothing has changed on that front.
Yeah, but John, now that personal conduct policy, it's supposed to cover assault, battery, domestic violence, sexual assault, anything with a physical force. And Roger Goodell, I mean, they go against their own policy. The policy is meaningless. They said it's supposed to be suspension without pay of 6 games for a first offense. And there's just repeated times where the number has been 4 or 2 or 3 or anything but 6.
Because it never really changed. And this is where, again, reporters need to explain this. When the NFL unilaterally made that assumption and said we're going to use 6 games in domestic violence as the baseline, essentially all that was the commissioner saying, I'm going to use this standard moving forward. He had the right to suspend Jameis Winston 6 games before that date, 6 games after that date, 1 game, 2 games, a full season, whatever he wanted. And that is the part that never changed. And I wrote about it the day it changed. I wrote about it 3 years earlier, 3 years later when Josh Brown came down, and I wrote about it with Jameis Winston. Nothing has changed, and people need to understand that. It was just the promise of the commissioner who has lacked consistency. Now, if you want to criticize him for that, feel free. He deserves it. But just because he said it, it wasn't collectively bargained. It wasn't structured like the substance abuse penalties, so he doesn't have to do it.
Right. So many instances there. You talked about Josh Brown. He was suspended one game, or the Packers tight end back was firing a gun in the air during an argument. He got 2 games. Or Junior Gillette, the Washington linebacker, he got suspended 2 games. There seems to be no rhyme and reason. Is the problem, John, the fact that the NFL keeps trying to say, well, there's mitigating circumstances, and yet they don't tell you what those circumstances are? Is that the issue, that if you're going to cite mitigating circumstances, they ought to tell you what those are?
Well, the issue is the lack of consistency. I mean, if you say you're going to use 6 games as a baseline, you should use 6 games. And in this issue, it would have been 6 games if Jameis Winston was like Ezekiel Elliott or Tom Brady and tried to fight this in court. He would have got suspended for 6 games. So in essence, if you want to use a legal terminology, this was a plea bargain from Jameis Winston. He agreed to not push the matter, not fight it, and because he agreed to that, the league said, okay, we'll knock it in half. And that helps him from not only, obviously, a game standpoint, but a financial standpoint. So it was, in essence, it was a plea bargain in the NFL court. But, yeah, the lack of consistency has always been the problem with the NFL on personal conduct issues, and that's in the lap of the commissioner, and it always has been.
And then today, I guess there's news out that maybe there's a possibility that Winston wouldn't even start week 4 based on the way the schedule is. Are you buying into that? Because they talk about the fact that the Bucs play on Monday night in week 3. The suspension doesn't start until the Tuesday afterwards on a short week going into week 4. Would they want to throw him to the Wolves on that short week after 3 weeks off?
To be honest, I don't even know if he's going to be on the Buccaneers. I still think there are dominoes to fall here. We see it all the time with the so-called Me Too movement. There's such pressure. We've seen it in Hollywood. We've seen it in sports. We saw it with Jerry Richardson, who was forced to sell a $2 billion business. I could see sort of the torches and pitchforks out to the point where Tampa Bay says, you know what? We don't want to deal with this any longer. So before we get to week 4, let's get to week 1 and see if he's going to serve the suspension with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Right, which we discussed the other day, which would put the Eagles in an interesting spot as, I guess, a team that would be on the list of teams to call, right?
Yeah, I mean, especially Nick Foles' book just came out, and he mentioned that along with the Eagles, the other team that was hot and heavy after his services as a backup at the time was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So it was pretty clear they liked Nick back then. If you liked Nick back then, you certainly like him now.
Right.
So I think it would be, I think that would be one of the first calls they make.
Yeah, I want to play something for you, John. This is Damian Woody this morning on Golic and Wingo.
Where is the explanation as to why it's not 6 games? Why is it 3? I think that's the thing that everyone really wants to know is, give us an explanation. How do you come about these things as far as discipline, as far as games being suspended? That's the thing that really baffles me.
Right. So we kind of touched on this a little bit yesterday. He's saying, why not 6? Why only 3? You could arbitrarily say, why not 8? Why not 12? Why only 3? But as you've said, they put the commissioner in control of these things. They don't have anything legitimately written for, hey, if you grope an Uber driver, you get 6 games. It's just arbitrarily handed out.
Yeah, I mean, again, and I called it a game of 3-card Monty when Roger Goodell went up in front of people and started with the 6-game baseline for domestic violence. I mean, then you could get into semantics. Is grabbing the crotch of an Uber driver domestic violence? Technically, no. It's sexual assault, though. So where does the baseline begin and where does the baseline end? Roger Goodell. And I believe he would have been suspended 6 games if he decided to fight this. This was a deal. And I also believe if Ezekiel Elliott would have made a similar deal, he would have been suspended 3 or 4 games and not 6. There's no proof because there's no consistency. That part of it I will freely admit.
Right.
But it's evident why it went from 6 to 3 games, and that's because he made a deal.
Right, because there is, by the way, a 6-game suspension policy, right? Effective immediately, violations of the personal conduct policy regarding assault, battery, domestic violence, or sexual assault that involve physical force will be subject to a suspension without pay of 6 games for a first offense. That's what Goodell had written after the...
Yeah, but that, Mike, that is my pet peeve.
Okay.
Roger Goodell wrote that unilaterally. He promised it. It doesn't mean he has to do it. It was not collectively bargained. He had the right to do that before the NFL trotted that out. He has the right to do it now. He also has the right to ignore it, which he just did. So my point to everyone out there is just because they said that, it doesn't mean they have to use it. Whereas a substance abuse or a PED suspension, that's clearly defined in the CBA, and that was collectively bargained. And that's why you see the suspensions, whether it's 2 games, 10 games, full season. Those are all structured. The personal conduct is not structured. All there is that promise from Roger Goodell.
By the way, some breaking news here that the Eagles linebacker Nigel Bradham has been suspended for the first game of the 2018 season. It doesn't say why. It just he's been suspended.
And how long did that take?
This, I guess, is stemming back from. This is stemming from the 2016 gun at the airport thing.
I would think it would be more because of the fight with the Cabana boy who accused him of punching him. I don't think it was the gun, but I don't know.
Yeah, this is just Field Yates, by the way, ESPN 3 minutes ago.
Yeah, we had all assumed that he wouldn't be suspended because I was talking about this early last season. I said I wouldn't have been surprised if Nigel got suspended for a game or 2. At the beginning of last season. So what took so long? Hey, that's where the NFL really needs to improve, and that's where Damian Woody, made some sense in the fact that you have to communicate better. You have to explain what's going on to people who aren't going to dive into the minutia of these policies. And let's be honest, that's the casual fan. They have no interest in all of 2 games, 6 games, the difference between substance abuse and personal conduct. To them, it looks silly. And that's because it's not communicated properly.
The losing Bradham for 1 game isn't a huge deal, but it certainly for that opening night will be a huge loss.
It's going to be interesting.
That's one area where they are where they're a little thin. Let me ask you this: do you, without knowing even what this is for, would you anticipate that he would appeal? This is going from 2000.
I doubt it for 1 game.
Right, for 1 game.
I assume because why it's taken so long is he probably did appeal already. Don't know that for a fact. I'll have to get on the phone and start texting people after I get off. But I would assume he already has appealed. And who knows? Maybe it was 2 games and knocked down to 1. That would be my guess. Is that part of it has already come and gone. And Nigel's not going to be there week 1, and that's probably one of the positions. Already lost Michael Kendricks. You released him.
Wow, this Michael Kendricks thing is really having a spiral effect, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're probably going to have Corey Nelson playing a lot in that opener. Maybe a lot of big nickel. Malcolm Jenkins playing linebacker again, and then we got to bring up Corey Graham because he's going to be that 3rd safety.
John McMullen with us here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. The NFL saw a 73% rise in preseason concussions last year. we talk so much about the concussions on and off the field, the kickoffs and all that stuff. But the one thing, the 73% rise in preseason concussions, I don't know that. Can you sit here and say because of the inexperience of players that potentially that's why they're getting concussed?
I mean, this is just a guess, but when you see a wild sort of statistical anomaly like that,
so that sounds like a lot.
That points to you probably weren't recording it properly to begin with, because I can't imagine if you're doing things the same way, and there was no drastic change in how the NFL did business between those 2 years. Why would you have that kind of spike? I just think it would have more to do with the way you collected information.
Another interesting story. We talked a lot about the American, the Alliance Football League?
Right.
What was it?
The Alliance of American Football.
There we go. That's the other
Rolls
league.
off the tongue.
Yeah. The Alliance of American Football League. We talked a lot about that the other week. This is the XFL, which plans to launch in 2020. According to ESPN, John, Vince McMahon says he is ready to spend $500 million to do whatever it takes to keep the XFL in business longer than the 1 year it lasted the last time. So over $500 million for the first 3 seasons to make sure this thing gets off the ground.
Well, I think Vince and Linda McMahon had a deal, and Linda got to waste $100 million to try to get into the U.S. Senate, and Vince gets to waste $500 million on football. That's the only thing I can get.
Well, this is interesting. Oliver Luck said the biggest expense will be player and coach salaries. The average XFL salary will be about $75,000. Is that attractive for a player to say, hey, I mean, if you're making
attractive for somebody who's got to work at UPS and
well,
get cut
that's what I'm saying. When you
team.
But what are these spring leagues typically doling out? Not $75,000.
No, I mean, for that second tier player, it's very attractive, but I don't know who's going to watch that second tier player. Now, what I hear from the XFL, they're going to go after big name coaches, and that's where they're going to spend their money. So it's going to be interesting. They kind of are going, and I'll call it the Chip Kelly route. They think coaches are the stars.
Like college football.
Yeah, and players are dispensable. So exactly like college football. And that's how they're going to run it. I don't think it's going to work, but I think that's their business plan.
Well, $75,000. I don't know what the Alliance of American Football is willing to pay, but if they're competing with each other, $75,000 sounds like a heck of a lot better than some of these leagues. You hear these minor league baseball players
or semi-pro teams,
right,
even semi-pro football teams pay $300 a game or something like that. There was a lot of those in Omaha when I was out there.
For that group that can't make an NFL team and wants to continue to chase that dream, it's great. But I'm saying if you're going to spend $500 million on this, at some point you're going to want to turn the corner and actually make some money. I don't know how you do that.
You think,
other than the fact,
go ahead.
It's a vanity thing, and his wrestling company is now valued. The valuation is $6 billion.
Well,
so
I was going to ask you about that. The wrestling company, which ties into this a little bit, because just got a deal with Fox Television. Do you think the XFL was included in that deal for WWE SmackDown?
I don't think it was included because they've already made it public. But they said they're going to continue to negotiate. For instance, I think NXT, which is their developmental promotion, is going to be on FS1. And maybe down the road, they sort of have a wink-wink, and you can have XFL games. But, I'll tell you who should be angry here is the Brock Lesnar's and the Ronda Rouseys and people like that of the world who turned that company into something that could get a $2 billion television contract, and they're going to give $500 million to this new entity.
It's interesting too, John, because $500 million sounds like a lot over 3 seasons, but the NFL spends $5 billion a year just on player salaries. I mean, it's a drop in the bucket.
Yes, it is. And we will hear, because what starts July 1st, and you guys have already been talking about it with LeBron, NBA free agency. After the moratorium, you're going to see these ridiculous contracts, and you're going to see these stories about why are NBA players paid more than NFL players. $5 billion a year go to NFL salaries. It's the difference between carrying a 70-man roster, 53 plus practice squad plus injured reserve, versus 15.
Well,
duly noted.
Yeah, no, I know that's a conversation you and I have had a lot over the years. I've learned.
Hey, he's getting it out there before the free agency starts, so that
I write about it every year.
And you can read more of John's writing at getmoresports.com. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen, and check out all of his Eagles coverage at 973ESPN.com, including his latest on Jay Ajayi. Check that out right now at 973ESPN.com. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.